Greetings from OP Jindal Global University. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, and I quote, "If you cannot fly, then run. If you cannot run, then walk. If you cannot walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward." The spirit embodied in these words is what we all need in these testing times. And it is with these words and spirit that I, Nisha Nair, Assistant Professor and Assistant Dean, Academic Affairs, Graduate Program at Jindal Global Law School, OP Jindal Global University, along with my colleague, Professor Ankita Gandhi, Assistant Lecturer and Faculty Coordinator, Graduate Program at Jindal Global Law School, extend a warm welcome to all of you to the commencement lecture on the theme, Law and Liberal Values in an Illiberal Era. I would now request Professor S.G. Sridhar, Executive Dean, Jindal Global Law School, to deliver the welcome address.
Thank you, Professor Nisha. Dear everyone, good evening, and I welcome you all to this commencement lecture of the 2023 batch of the LL.B program. We have as the commencement speaker, Professor Peter H. Schuck, Simon E. Baldwin, Professor Emeritus of Law, Yale Law School, Yale University. Professor Schuck is a distinguished fellow and an eminent jurist at the Jindal Global Law School, OP Jindal Global University. Professor Peter Schuck's contribution to the phenomenal growth of JGU in the last 10 years is remarkable. We have also with us Professor C. Rajkumar, our dynamic founding Vice Chancellor and the Dean of Jindal Global Law School. Professor Kumar had a dream, the dream to build a world-class university in India through which the nation could achieve higher levels of excellence in higher education. Hence the motto, a private university promoting public service. Today, by the miraculous turn of the fate wheel, we have all become part of Professor Kumar's dream in one way or other. Then we have with us our dearest students, the batch of 2023, with a gleam in their eyes and many dreams in their hearts, not to forget their wonderful parents. We have also been joined by our registrar, Professor Sridhar Patnaik, the Director of Graduate Programs, Professor Manveen Singh, the Director of Law Admissions, Professor Anand Prakash Mishra. I also acknowledge the graceful presence of my colleagues, Professor Nisha Nair, Assistant Professor and Assistant Dean, Academic Affairs Graduate Programs, and Ms. Ankita Gandhi, Lecturer and Faculty Coordinator, Graduate Program. They are also the masters of this ceremony. I welcome you all to the commencement lecture on the theme, Law and Liberal Values in an Illiberal Era. If law is a matter of rights, rights is a matter of values. The values which are imbued in rights come from the deep structure of society, and therein from a sense of humanism and rationality. It is hence that value system in law is often referred to as liberal. Constitutions of nations, which are both aspirations of the people and promises of the state to them, are based on these liberal values: equality, liberty, freedom of speech, equal opportunity, and mutual respect. The totality of these values is the cornerstone of egalitarian societies. Remove these values, you rob subjects of their human dignity. The subjective, universal human values have come under severe threat of late. A new type of inwardness has started to emerge, which has begun to acquire a sense of virulent nationalism, which in turn has threatened the liberal fabric of law and society. But what can be the potential resistance to such value loss? Who can save the losing values? Perhaps the state. But can the state and its government-controlled means and machineries set themselves free from the parochial motivations to reach out to the people seeking its protection? If yes, how can the state actualize its social and political agency, its commitment to the people? Can law, as it is in its late modern radicalism, help subdue the capricious politics between governments and the people and actualize the ideals of the state, recovering the lost values? Professor Peter Schuck, the distinguished scholar who has devoted decades engaging with such questions, will speak in great detail about our degeneration to illiberal societies. Of his many works in this regard, my personal favorite is his 2004 book, Why Governments Fail So Often and How Can We Do Better, a work that prompts us to look beyond partisan politics for policy failures. But it's for you to listen these ideas from Professor Peter Schuck in all their fine originality rather than through my ill-articulated murmurings. Once more, I welcome you all to this commencement lecture and to the Jindal Global Law School. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sridhar, for delivering the inspiring welcome address. I would now like to invite Professor C. Rajkumar, the founding Vice Chancellor of OP Jindal Global University and Dean Jindal Global Law School, to foreground the ethos and vision that has led JGU to be recognized as a coveted institution of learning in India, and to introduce the commencement speaker.
Good evening to all of you. First of all, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you to this commencement lecture. This commencement lecture is organized particularly to welcome the students of the 3-year LL.B program, the graduate law program at Jindal Global Law School of OP Jindal Global University. We are so delighted and truly honored that a very distinguished professor, a true public intellectual, somebody who is deeply passionate about the issues that he writes and talks and reads and reflects, but most importantly, the most special friend of OP Jindal Global University and Jindal Global Law School, whose friendship with the idea, whose connectedness with the vision predates the very establishment of OP Jindal Global University and Jindal Global Law School. I am grateful to Professor Peter Schuck for accepting our invitation to deliver the commencement lecture on the theme, Law and Liberal Values in an Illiberal Era. Before I formally introduce Professor Schuck, let me begin by articulating about the extraordinary special moment that we are in today. For all the students who are part of the 3-year LL.B program at Jindal, I would like to extend my heartiest congratulations for having admitted to Jindal Global Law School. It's also a very special moment that many of you have joined the university and the law school, and now you are beginning the new academic session, the new academic year, without even visiting the campus. You're all closeted in your own homes in front of a computer, and the beginning of the academic session is happening in this unprecedented environment. But I want to say that you have already exhibited a true sense of leadership, a deep sense of resilience, that this global pandemic that has fundamentally altered and shaken the global imagination of higher education, including legal education, has not discouraged you to pursue your own goals and aspirations. You have chosen to join the Jindal Global Law School and begin your academic journey on this day, when at a time when universities around the world, law schools around the world are being challenged, and there is an uncertain future when they are looking at the beginning of the academic session itself. Even in India, with over 1,600 law schools and law schools with different imaginations, there are very few institutions, and Jindal Global Law School is the only such law school which has been able to begin its academic session on September 1. I also want to take this opportunity to thank your parents, as your success has been hugely inspired and encouraged and supported by your parents and your family members and others. Now, of course, in the US, the word commencement often denotes the idea of a graduation ceremony, what we in India would call the convocation address. Now, of course, at Jindal, we established a culture of a commencement lecture at the beginning of the academic journey. Now, arguably, the word commencement can also mean the beginning of a new era in the context of US, after you have graduated and you are beginning the journey into a professional world, or for that matter, pursuing higher education opportunities. In India and at Jindal, we have used the word commencement lecture as an important beginning of your academic journey. I've always been strongly committed to the idea of a 3-year LL.B program. At a time when, since the 1980s, India has seen the evolution of undergraduate studies in law with the start of the integrated BA LL.B and BBA LL.B program. Jindal Global Law School and OP Jindal Global University has been committed with the idea of a graduate LL.B program since its inception. Right from the year 2009, when we started our law school and the university, we have always had a 5-year integrated LL.B program and a 3-year LL.B program. Of course, over the years, this 3-year LL.B program that you are part of has grown from strength to strength, and it has been able to attract some of the most outstanding young minds, graduates from numerous disciplines across different universities in India and beyond, after having completed their undergraduate studies, have come to join the Jindal Global Law School's 3-year LL.B program. Very quickly, I want to introduce the university itself. OP Jindal Global University and Jindal Global Law School was founded through a philanthropic initiative of our founding chancellor and benefactor, Mr. Naveen Jindal. The vision from day one was to establish a world-class university in India. I had the privilege to study in universities in the UK, such as the University of Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar, and then at Harvard Law School, and then worked in New York. And during all those years of my life and work and study in the US, I was deeply inspired by what I had seen in the US in particular. And that led me to a journey that I undertook, in which I practiced law in New York. I worked as a visiting fellow at New York University and then taught in Japan and for many years in Hong Kong. But let me say that the most defining part of my experience was actually in New York City, at the basement of the NYU Law Library, where Professor Peter Schuck had an office at that time, where he was also teaching at NYU. I met Peter. I could actually stop and say the rest is history. Peter inspired me so much during those early days to talk in terms of the evolution of American higher education and American legal education, in particular, the role and extraordinary contribution of Yale Law School and other such institutions. I was convinced that India needed such institutions that were truly transformative institutions contributing to the excellence and the pursuit of excellence in higher education and legal education. But Peter didn't stop there. His passion and commitment and dedication to the larger vision of contributing towards institution building and even understanding India led him to come to India as a Fulbright scholar, and he spent a year working in different institutions in India, traveling across the length and breadth of India during those years. Of course, I got to meet him and spend more time with him in India and got to talk about the idea of this new global university and a global law school. To cut the story short, as late as 2009, when we actually began the academic session, Professor Peter Schuck, not only in this early phase of our evolution, supported us, he literally moved from New York to Sonipat, to Haryana, and taught for an entire semester the inaugural batch of the students of Jindal Global Law School, OP Jindal Global University, and lived in what is now, what at that time used to be known as Sushan City in near Sonipat, and of course would be on campus and mentored the first batch of students. Peter Schuck is one of the most generous and magnanimous and thoughtful and kind human beings I've ever met in my life. We at OP Jindal Global University and at Jindal Global Law School owe a debt of deep intellectual gratitude for his generosity, his commitment, his dedication, and his passion towards the values of institution building that OP Jindal Global University has advanced. During all these 11 years of our evolution, he has served as a distinguished member of the governing body of the university, which he holds even now, but also chair of the International Board of Advisors of Jindal Global Law School. There are too many things to talk about him and share about him, including his extraordinary contribution as a scholar, teacher, researcher, institution builder, partner, collaborator, and indeed a great friend of OP Jindal Global University. But I'm not going to do that because we are all keen to listen to him. All I can say is that he's one of those individuals who has a very deep sense of understanding of law and the limits of law as a social institution. He has written widely on that subject and many articles and publications. But most importantly, he continues to be deeply engaged in both the academic and the research and the advanced publications on the one hand, but also a public scholar, a truly remarkable public intellectual. His public writings published in New York Times and other leading dailies are also advancing and resonates with people who are beyond the scholarly community. So I am very delighted that Professor Peter Schuck had accepted our invitation to deliver the commencement lecture. But before I formally invite Professor Peter Schuck, let me call upon Professor Anand Prakash Mishra, the Director of Law Admissions at OP Jindal Global University and Associate Dean of Jindal Global Law School, to introduce the LLB class of 2020 to all of us.
Very good evening, everyone. This is indeed an honor and a pleasure to introduce this amazing class of 220 students who have joined our LLB 3-year program. To our chief guest of today, Professor Peter Schuck, to our founding Vice Chancellor and founding Dean of Law School, Professor Rajkumar, to our Executive Dean, Professor Sridhar, Dr. Manveen, Professor Nisha Nair, to our Registrar, and all other colleagues. This occasion is really very, very special. I'm very sure these students, when they will graduate and ever in their life, they will remember that their study of law started with an inaugural lecture, a commencement lecture delivered by Professor Peter Schuck, who could arguably be one of the most eminent and living legend in the field of law scholarship in the whole world. A 1965 JD graduate of Harvard Law School, Professor Peter Schuck is one of those few people who have taught in topmost law schools around the world, and including India at one point of time. And we are blessed and fortunate to have him. To introduce this class of 220 students, I am extremely delighted to tell all of you that this is a class where we have students joining from 55 Indian universities, as well as 7 universities from the United States, from UK, and Hong Kong. We have graduates joining from around the country and around the world. It's a truly global class that way. We have graduates from University of Chicago, Northeastern University in Boston, University of Southern California in Los Angeles, Emory University in Atlanta, Durham University in the UK, King's College London, and City University Hong Kong. At the same time, 3 universities I would like to mention in particular: University of Delhi and OP Jindal Global University, where more than 50 graduates have joined our LLB 3-year program. Another 20 have joined from University of Mumbai. And from University of Delhi, I'm extremely delighted to see 10 girl students, 10 students from Lady Sridhar College, which is, on many parameters ranked to be one of the best women colleges in the country. There are another 5 from SRCC. There are 6 from Sri Venkateshwara College. There are 3 from Hindu, from Miranda House, from Jesus and Mary, from IP College for Women, from Kirorimal College, from Ramjas College, from Hindu College, from Hansraj College. The best graduates from the best degree colleges in the University of Delhi have chosen to join our LLB program. At OP Jindal Global University, I'm extremely delighted to see our graduates in economics, in global affairs, which is an international relations bachelor's degree, graduates in journalism, and graduates in liberal arts and humanities program who have joined more than 50 students our LLB 3-year program. There are 20 graduates from University of Mumbai coming from St. Xavier's, which has the highest contribution, 5 graduates of St. Xavier's Mumbai. There are graduates from Sophia College, HR College, Mithibai College, Jai Hind College, KC College, Podar and Somaya College. 20 graduates from University of Mumbai have joined us. Similarly, we have students from University of Madras. There are 2 from the alma mater of our Vice Chancellor, from Loyola College, Madras. There are students from Madras Christian College, from DG Vaishnav College. And then we have students from St. Xavier's, Kolkata, and from colleges and universities around the country. I'm extremely delighted to have such a wonderful, diverse class in our campus this year. If I look at the subjects they have studied, you won't believe there are 12 who are engineers. Students have studied physics, computer science, botany and geology, and they have also studied English literature, BCom, international relations. They have studied journalism and mass communication. They have studied history, political science, almost every area, and even they have studied architecture at bachelor's and master's level from universities like School of Planning and Architecture and Nottingham University. I'm really delighted that such a wonderful class had joined our university, and it could be one of the best LLB classes anywhere in the country. I know we all are actually waiting to hear our chief guest. I won't take much time, but in another 2 minutes, I would like to remember our alumni of LLB program today, those 20 students who joined us in 2009 and graduated in 2012. Even in the batch of 2009, we had an University of Pennsylvania graduate who came when we had nothing. It was just a university with 10 faculty members and very little built up space with no name or legacy or anything. And a girl student came all the way, graduating from University of Pennsylvania, and joined us in the LLB program in 2009. In the very first batch, I could see our students, Anga Anand Kumaran went to University of Toronto, Chumar went to New York University, Harika went to Cornell Law School, Parthan went to the Graduate Institute in Geneva, Samriddhi Vasudeva first went to Arizona and then to an Australian university for the second master's, and Shweta went to Singapore Management University for her LLM. Later on, I can see our graduates like Teresa Puttumana, who went to BPP Law School in UK, and she is now an associate in White & Case London office for quite some time. And Kush Makkar, who was a Commonwealth shared a scholar at University of Cambridge, and who also taught at Jindal Global Law School and now working as a lawyer in London. Our LLB program has produced extraordinary graduates. And today, if I look at the law firms, the industry, they are everywhere from White & Case London to the Shardula Merchant, Cyril Merchant, Ketan and Company. Almost every leading law firm in India has our LLB 3-year graduates working. Last year, I recall one of our graduates got INLAC's scholar to study in University of Oxford, Anirudh Bele, and he successfully completed his master's in law from Oxford University and now enrolled in DPhil, the doctorate degree in law at the same university on a full scholarship. So I'm extremely delighted to welcome all the students to this class of LLB 2020 and to Jindal Global Law School. We have high hopes from you. You have a great legacy to follow. You have brilliant alumni who have produced results in almost every sphere of legal profession and practice. And of course, you have to look forward to your faculty members who will be teaching you. We are now over 400 full-time faculty members in law school, arguably one of the largest law faculty in whole of Asia. So with these words, I will like to end my brief introduction of the class. And again, I will say we are fortunate and blessed to have Professor Peter Schuck with us on this auspicious day. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mishra, for introducing the LLB class of 2020. We welcome the students and hope to make studying at JGU an enriching experience for them. My colleague, Professor Ankita Gandhi, would now take over the proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Nisha, and good evening to everybody present here at this August House today. We have now arrived at the most awaited moment of the evening. It is my honor and privilege to invite the chief guest of the evening, Professor Peter H. Schuck, the Simeon E. Baldwin Professor Emeritus of Law at Yale University, to deliver the commencement lecture. Professor Schuck, the floor is all yours now.
Thank you very much, Professor Gandhi and Professor Mishra, and of course, Vice Chancellor Raj Kumar for that splendid introduction to the program and to the history of this extraordinarily inventive and important institution. I also want to express my congratulations to the Chancellor, Naveen Jindal, the Vice Chancellor, Raj Kumar, from whom you've already heard, members of the governing board of this great university and law school, esteemed faculty and administrators, cherished students, most important, and your devoted parents. When I speak of the cherished students, I'm awed by the sacrifice and the extraordinary determination, perhaps even courage, that you have displayed in beginning your legal studies at this highly unusual time. Just a word about Jindal Global University. Its history is truly remarkable, and Vice Chancellor Kumar gave you just the barest outline of that history. But as somebody who was here from the very, very beginning and observed him and tried to give him some help along the way, it is an extraordinarily inventive and highly aspirational undertaking. It reflects the founder's wisdom in the service of grand ideals and of practical wisdom, two virtues that are not always brought together, but they have been brought together in the leadership of this great institution, the grand ideals and the practical wisdom. It's also been committed from the very beginning to problem solving and to the development of political skills necessary to overcome endless obstacles, large and small, that were interposed in the path of this great institution before it began its work. And someday I hope that Vice Chancellor Kumar will write down this history for the generations to follow, because it was a really remarkable political and visionary effort, as well as an intellectual and academic one. All of this was driven by a vision of a multidisciplinary approach to social analysis and to a just legal system. I've had the great pleasure and privilege of working with the founders of Jindal Global University since Raj shared his inspiration with me almost 20 years ago in a chance encounter in New York City, which he's already recounted, so I won't repeat that. And I was also privileged and much educated in my own life by my experience teaching Jgls's first batch in the spring of 2010. That's ancient history. The university has moved on, the law school has moved on, and achieving ever greater victories in educating new batches of students and the graduates going out into the world and accomplishing great things that you too will accomplish when you complete your work here. You're entering upon your studies at a particularly challenging time when the rule of law itself is under serious challenge. And this is true throughout the democratic world. India, of course, is the greatest democracy, at least in terms of numbers, in the world. And we all take our inspiration from the ability of India to grapple with the challenges that I'm about to recount. But I'm primarily going to refer to the American experience, which, although on a somewhat smaller scale than India's, nevertheless reflects the crisis of liberalism that we now face. And I'm going to define my terms, so I want to move from the abstract to the more specific. And I also want to begin with a statement of fact, which is extraordinarily important as you enter upon your legal studies. And it may not surprise you, but it's a very important piece of background for your own studies. And that is, most of the world is essentially lawless. So you're studying at a great law school, acquiring all the skills of the legal system and aspiring to the ideals of the system of justice in a world in which those virtues are relatively rare. And they are rare because there's something very elusive about them as a result of the limitations of human nature and commitment to liberal values, and of course, the advance of autocracy throughout much of the world. In my brief remarks today, I want to focus on 4 questions. What is this rule of law to which you will devote your professional lives? This is a definitional question, and it's one that I hope you will reflect upon as you begin your studies. The second question is, which values are essential to support and nourish this rule of law? The third is, what are the main threats to these liberal values? Threats that I shall call illiberalism. And finally, and most important for practical purposes, and as you enter into your studies, what can you, students of Jgls, do to protect liberalism and the rule of law? So those are the 4 questions that will frame my remarks. I will be very brief, and then I will address questions that will be directed at me. And I'm very much looking forward to that opportunity to interact with you in that way. So the first question is, what is the rule of law? We talk about the rule of law extensively without much thought given to what it is and how we know when it's in existence and how we know when it's threatened. And there are 4 defining structural features. The substantive content of the rule of law will come a little bit later in my remarks, but I want to begin with the substantive institutional features of the rule of law. They are not necessarily carried out in the spirit of the rule of law, but I'm going to come to that in a moment. The first feature of the structure of the rule of law is a complex system of even more complex rules and sanctions prescribing what people must, may, and may not do under specified conditions. That's one way of simply specifying what a law is. A second structural feature of the rule of law is that these rules also provide principles of fairness, exceptions, flexibility to the rules that I've just defined. We call this equity. And in the course of your studies, you're going to learn a lot about the principles of equity and how they interact with the principles of law. In Britain and in the United States up until the 1930s, these were 2 rather separate systems, institutionally discrete systems. They've been brought together, and one of the great challenges to law students is integrating law and equity. Another structural feature of the rule of law is, of course, the system of courts and administrative tribunals. And before I go further, I want to emphasize that the administrative tribunals are in many respects more important than the courts because most of the decisions of administrative tribunals do not reach the courts. And the vast majority of the work of the law is undertaken in administrative tribunals, agencies, departments, and government structures of various kinds. A very, very small percentage of those reach the courts. So the relationship between courts and administrative tribunals is extraordinarily important. It is a defining feature of the rule of law. This system of courts and administrative tribunals interprets and applies the rules to specific facts. That sounds very simple. It's very complex and will be one of the great challenges of your studies in understanding how that works and what the difficulties, the analytical and institutional difficulties are that you need to confront in interpreting rules and applying them to specific facts. These tribunals also publicly justify their decisions as precedents. That's the part of the court system that you may read about in the papers where they issue a decision. Whether those decisions are precedents or not is itself a very complex question. And you will, especially in your first year, you will struggle to try to understand the nature of precedent and the relationship of particular decisions to precedents and the interpretation of precedents that you need to undertake in order to decide how rules of law do and do not apply. And then, of course, the system of tribunals enforces orders. That's where the rubber meets the road, as it were. These tribunals decide what people must do and provide for sanctions if they fail to do those. The last formal institutional feature of the rule of law that I'll mention is what in the United States is especially important and is true in any democratic system that embraces the rule of law, and that is the separation and distribution of powers among the various elements of the legal system. These tribunals that I've just described must enjoy substantial independence from politicians, from bureaucrats, and even from the voters who create the rules, at least the politicians, the bureaucrats, and in some cases the voters directly, who create the rules in the first place. That kind of independence is a very hard-won virtue that has required centuries of development in the law that you will study, and even today it is very much under threat because the politicians and the bureaucrats and the voters often have somewhat less respect for the rule of law when it begins to impinge on their own authority and their sense of what they want the law to be than the system requires. So those are the formal features of the rule of law. Once it is institutionalized in these ways, which values, procedural and substantive, which values must infuse and nourish and sustain the rule of law? Now, Jindal Global Law School will train you to analyze these values very, very carefully. You're in very good hands in attempting to understand how these rule of law values get represented and institutionalized, defended and challenged in the systems that you're about to master. The first way in which the rule of law system is institutionalized is by providing individual and group access to the system, not just formal access, but practical access. So in the US, for example, there is a constitutional right not only to counsel in criminal cases, but to competent counsel in criminal cases, so that a defendant who is subjected to criminal sanction can argue under certain circumstances that her or his lawyer was not sufficiently well-trained or attentive to the necessities of the case to defend that person properly. So it's not just formal, but it's also practical. In India, you have the very unusual institution called public interest litigation, which has a very glorious history in India, especially in the last few decades. And you will certainly learn about not only what that is, but how to deploy the public interest litigation framework to address legal and non-legal problems that confront your clients and the country more generally. So the first rule of law of value is individual and group access. The second is legal equality. Legal equality sounds like something to which no one could object, but it actually is a very complex idea because it is based on the notion that the law should treat like cases alike. But like has to be defined. Whether two cases are actually alike in the critical respects that legal equality requires is something that you will spend many, many years analyzing, and Jgls will teach you how to do that. The idea of treating like cases alike is to prevent arbitrary discrimination. So in the United States system of law, we have the Equal Protection Clause, which guarantees that like cases will be treated alike. And we have statutes that also define the circumstances in which like cases will be treated alike. And then we have the process, a very important process, which again you will be grounded in here at Jindal, is common law reasoning. That is reasoning that is not dictated by statutes or by the Constitution, but rather by the analysis of specific cases, past and present, by common law judges. A third element of the rule of law substantively is what I call substantive equality. The scope of substantive equality is probably the most important struggle in every democracy among liberals and moderates and conservatives. I want to spend a bit of time on substantive equality because it is a value that is frequently invoked by members of society without really analyzing carefully what it requires. And as I say, it's the most important struggle in every democracy. So you begin by asking, what should equality include? Equal opportunity, that's one thing, or equality of outcome or result. That's a very different thing. In the United States, we are primarily committed to equality of opportunity, and we limit equality of result to a rather narrow but important range of goods. Standard of living is one measure of what those goods should be. Another is consumption. What goods do individuals have? What services do they have access to? That's one vision of substantive equality. Another vision is substantive equality itself. That is, everybody has the same. So if you compare the United States on the one hand and a more egalitarian country like Sweden, which is much less egalitarian than it used to be, an important development, from which we can learn a lot. You see that really this is a struggle between two different conceptions of what equality means. The US has a very hybrid conception of equality. In the US, market choice is the most important determinant of outcomes, but market choice is constrained by a limited number of formal legal rights. Again, just to connect what I'm saying to the larger theme, we're really grappling with the question of what substantive equality means. So we have the market choices which shape most of what happens in our society, but it is constrained by a limited number of formal legal rights, entitlements. The first and most important one is political participation. Everybody has the right, constitutionally required right, to participate in politics with an equal opportunity to influence the outcome. The reality is considerably different, and we're facing an election in which the political participation of all Americans is very much at risk, this is a great challenge to us in this election year of 2020. I'll have a little bit more to say about that in a moment. A second legal entitlement, which is not based on but which is not tied to the market, is public education. Everybody in the United States is entitled to at least 12 years of public education. Again, the reality is that that education often varies a lot, so that the quality of education enjoyed by some Americans is vastly different than the quality of education enjoyed by others, and that's a major political and in some instances legal struggle in the United States to bring those into closer alignment. The United States also has a whole range, as India does, of anti-discrimination or equal opportunity laws. The right to a lawyer in criminal cases is also independent of markets. Although again, the reality is that if you don't have much money, the type of legal representation you're likely to get is less than somebody who can pay for a better lawyer and who will spend more time on the case. And then there are basic entitlements, welfare entitlements for the poor in the United States that are independent of the market. Food, to some extent healthcare, but housing is not an entitlement in the US. Equal access to housing is not, there's a proscription against discrimination against people who seek housing on the basis of disability and race and religion and so forth. But the right actually to have a housing unit that is safe and comfortable is not one of those equality rights. This brings me to the most worrisome aspect of the rule of law, and that is what the main threats to that rule of law are. This is what I call illiberalism. And illiberalism thrives under certain conditions. Some of these I fear, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn because I'm not an Indian, but some of them apply in India without any question. The first threat to the rule of law is autocratic, anti-democratic leaders who care only about expanding their personal power. I would say that that's true of President Trump, and I'm going to have more to say about that in a moment. Whether that's true in India or not is something that you folks will debate among yourselves. But the emergence of powerful men, it's almost always men, although when Indira Gandhi was your prime minister, she was, by most accounts, as ruthless as any man. These people care only about expanding their power and the power of their party to get what they want. To many of them, these leaders are, they've made politics into a business, not a sacred calling, but a business, a way of expanding their wealth. So that's one threat to the rule of law. A second threat to the rule of law is the perverting and the hollowing out of institutions that are necessary to support the rule of law and democratic life more generally. This is the use of democratic forms to conceal the subversion of the rule of law. And I want to share with you a list of some of the techniques that have been used in the United States by President Trump in order to pervert and hollow out these institutions of justice. These are my own personal opinions, obviously, but I think they're very widely shared in the United States, and we'll see how widely shared they are when we go to the polls in November. The first is to violate laws designed to assure due process and fairness. In the United States, a major such statute is called the Administrative Procedure Act, and President Trump has issued many regulations that are in violation of those fair procedures and have installed regulations which are not legally valid. Fortunately, the courts have struck down most of those attempts. A second technique that's used in the United States today has been to declare national emergencies to circumvent the popular will. This is a tried and true technique of the enemies of the rule of law. In the United States, President Trump has done this on a number of occasions, in particular in diverting funds to build his wall between the United States and Mexico. He hasn't done that. He hasn't succeeded in that, but he claims that he has. A third is the cynical use of online platforms to spread scurrilous lies about opponents. This is very common in the United States today. I'm sure it's very common in India today. And frankly, if we're to preserve our democracy, if we're going to keep the rule of law vivid and constitutional, we need to figure out ways to control that. It's a very, very challenging task. I don't have any great answers to that, particularly in the United States, where the First Amendment, as you'll learn, protects freedom of speech and has been interpreted very, very broadly by the Supreme Court, both liberally dominated Supreme Courts and conservatively dominated Supreme Courts. Another technique which is designed to undermine the rule of law and is on full display in the United States is to treat the media as the enemy of the people. Donald Trump has done this almost every day of his administration through tweeting and through his speeches, and it is a very frightening technique which in a country that has populist traditions is often very appealing to many people who regard the media, particularly the Washington Post, the New York Times, even the Wall Street Journal, these national organs of opinion as elite institutions. Another threat to the rule of law is on display, and that is to subvert the integrity of institutions. In the United States, the most honored institution is the military. And yet President Trump has, in a variety of ways, tried to weaken the independence of the military and use it for his personal ends. And also to subvert the integrity of constitutional safeguards, which is a larger category of many of the things that I've been suggesting. Another challenge to the rule of law, another technique of illiberalism, is to foment division among citizens. In the United States, the main way in which that's done is through racism and nativism sentiments on the part of many of our leaders. These sentiments are being very strongly opposed by, I think, most Americans, but there is sufficient vulnerability on the part of many Americans to claims that assert the racial or immigrant-related inferiority of many people in our country. This is certainly true in India. I don't have to rehearse that as well, often based on religious and national origins. Another technique is to conceal the actual and potential conflicts of interest. In the United States Constitution, there is a clause called the Emoluments Clause, which prohibits the officials of the United States from receiving anything of personal value from another country. And that's been violated by President Trump in many ways. There's a lawsuit to challenge it, but that lawsuit struggles to establish the standing of the plaintiffs. Standing is a concept that you will learn quickly in law school. So this has a tendency to corrupt political and personal transactions in ways that the public often cannot see unless the press and the courts can reveal them. Another technique is to appoint deceitful and incompetent people, including judges, and get rid of the honest and competent ones. Then there are the lies. I just looked up the running tally of the number of lies that President Trump has uttered in his less than 4 years in office. And according to the Washington Post, which keeps track of these things, he has committed over 20, this was in July, it's a month and a half later, the number is much larger, 20,000 plus, and still counting, lies or misleading statements, which have attempted to mislead voters, avoid responsibility, dishonor heroes, and malign opponents. Another technique which is a strong sign of illiberalism is the blurring of the traditional line between the personal and the political. So, for example, you may have read that President Trump used the White House to stage the Republican convention, which was basically designed to show the adoration of Republicans for him. This has never been done before. I dare say if once he leaves office, it will never be done again. But it's been a way of making politics depend upon the personality of the so-called great leader. Perhaps the greatest specific challenge to the rule of law is the docility of citizens, especially moderate ones. This is not something that the law can really help. It dwells in the character of people of a country, and Jindal Global University hopefully will instill that spirit of challenge, of independent thinking, and of resistance to some of the kinds of techniques that threaten the rule of law that I've just recounted. This docility is especially dangerous when it occurs among moderate people, because the quality of any democracy depends ultimately on the moderate people in that society. It can't be guaranteed by people at the extremes, but people who are committed to discourse and moderate rule of law techniques. And I will close my remarks by listing some of those techniques. So the erosion of the spirit of liberty is really what I've been talking about. That is the greatest threat to liberalism and the rule of law. And that brings me to the final point, which was, as you may recall, what can you, that is as students at Jindal, what can you do as you begin your studies at Jindal Global Law School? In my view, the most important thing you can do is to preserve and nourish what has been called the spirit of liberty. Let me explain the origins of that concept. In 1944, a famous US federal judge, Learned Hand was his name, spoke to 1.5 million brand new United States citizens who were gathered in New York City's Central Park. And this is what he said, and I'm quoting, "What then is the spirit of liberty? I cannot define it," Hand said. "I can only tell you my own faith. The spirit of liberty is the spirit which is not too sure that it is right." That's very important. I'll come back to that in a moment. The spirit of liberty is the spirit which is not too sure that it is right. The spirit of liberty is the spirit which seeks to understand the minds of other men and women. The spirit of liberty is the spirit which weighs their interests alongside its own without bias. The spirit of liberty remembers that not even a sparrow falls to earth unheeded. The spirit of liberty is the lesson that there may be a kingdom where the least shall be heard and considered side by side with the greatest. Now, more specifically, what do those inspiring words mean? What should it mean to young Indians beginning their professional legal studies at a great institution like Jindal? First, there's humility. There's a vast amount that you need to learn about any particular moral, legal, policy, or scientific issue before you form your own opinion. Now, you're all very intelligent young men and women, and you have opinions about a lot of things. I would urge you to shelve those opinions until you've listened to the people who disagree with you and listened to your professors and read more and immersed yourself in these debates more deeply. A second virtue that I hope that you students will cultivate and exhibit is being flexible and open. You should hold your opinions tentatively, open to refuting evidence of arguments. If you're eager to understand this complex world, you will probably change your mind about things as you learn more and think more deeply. This is a virtue, not a fault. In a world in which you're going to be called upon to express strong opinions, it's a very tempting thing to want to have one. But it's also a very important thing to not be so sure that your opinions are right that you fail to listen to other people and to learn from new experience. So that brings me to my third great virtue, in addition to humility and flexibility, and that is listening. Do not assess other people's position on an issue until you have heard them out respectfully. Don't assume that you know their arguments simply by knowing their superficial attributes, such as color, gender, caste, social class, religion, geographical area, what they read, who their friends are, and their political party. The next one, again related to listening and to humility and flexibility, is thinking for yourself. We are social creatures, but you must make up your own mind in the end. Be suspicious of groupthink, of which you'll be exposed to a lot of it, even at Jindal, because that's the way young people often communicate. Resist what has been called the madness of crowds. Another virtue that you'll be needed to call upon almost every day in law school is the way in which you address arguments. Confront the best version of opposing arguments, not the weak versions that are the easiest to refute. That is to say, when you're up against an argument and there's an opposing side, consider what the best argument against your position is and grapple with that. Don't take refuge in a poor, weak, and clearly unpersuasive version of that argument. Social media. Use it to learn and debate, but not to damage the reputations or social standing of others. This in the United States and perhaps in India as well is called cancel culture. Avoid tossing around epithets like racist, sexist, or equivalent smears to characterize people or views. Such labels can destroy conversations, careers, and the pursuit of truth. And then the final value that you need to cultivate in order to protect and extend the spirit of liberty is justice. This is perhaps the most elusive social judgment there is, and we all speak as if we knew what justice is. But one needs to consider many trade-offs in defining what justice requires. Some of these trade-offs are short-term versus long-term effects, competing moralities, cost-benefit tensions, implementation factors, and much, much more. quick, simple judgments about what is just are often wrong and turn out to be themselves unjust. So I am very eager to hear your questions and points of view, but I hope that my brief remarks here have contributed to your understanding of the great challenges that await you, not only at Jindal, but for the rest of your lives, if you want to, as I'm sure you do, expand the spirit of liberty and the rule of law, which is under immense challenge today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter, for that absolutely inspiring and comprehensive tour de force on the evolution of the first principles, but also the values of rule of law and the challenges of enforcement of it, including your own virtues of being what you have called often yourself as a militant moderate, to have cool views on hot topics without getting swayed away by noise that might actually mislead one's opinions and perspectives. Your sobering reflection on the importance of the pursuit of discussions and debates on complex issues could not have come at a better time. And it is also important for young law students who are entering into legal studies to cultivate that sense of humility, gracefulness, and also a sense of what you have used the word views being tentative, so that they get to refine their views, constantly recognizing the importance of knowing more and even changing their views when they need to, and correcting themselves once they have learned that that's the right view. So thank you so much for all what you've done. We have, of course, lots of questions, so I'm going to take a few. So one of the questions that has come about is that you may have seen that book Farid Zakaria in 1997 had written about illiberal democracies. The question is that how can a polity be both democratic and illiberal in the long run? And is this not one of the fundamental possible fault lines? And do you see that trend happening?
I think that they can coexist. Unfortunately, they coexist in many places. The reason they can coexist is that democracy is the rule of the people. And if the people are illiberal and the people embrace illiberal politicians and leaders, then their government is going to reflect that. And it will nevertheless be democratic because they chose it. In the long run, I think illiberal institutions will not lead to people getting what they want out of their government, except in these irrational ways. But in terms of their the standard of living, their civil liberties, the way in which they relate to their fellow citizens, the way they treat people who are different in a variety of ways, those will all be strangled by illiberalism. But if that's what people want, then unfortunately that's what they're going to get. Now, at some point, an illiberal regime may so crush democratic values that you're no longer able to call it a democracy. We're worried about that in the United States now because we have an upcoming election in which the vote may be distorted by many of the incumbent politicians. And if that's the case, then it will be a fair question as to whether we have a democracy if the voters have not been heard.
Thank you so much, Peter. Peter, there's a very interesting question about the issue of police brutality. But the context of this question is also equally important because democracies are constantly working towards enforcing and implementing the rule of law, for which they rely upon law enforcement agencies. Now, of course, you know that the police have come under scathing criticism in both the United States and in India recently, in the former because of brutality against African Americans, and in the latter in India for clamping down on civil rights during the national lockdown. Now, how can law enforcement agencies be made more accountable for their actions which are at times undertaken with the same objective of protecting the rule of law?
A very, very important question. A couple of answers are very clear. One is that transparency is crucial. So the introduction, for example, of camcorders in New York City and I think most other major cities in which police have to wear on their person at all times a video recorder, which will also record what they say, is crucial. That's new, and I think it's probably operated rather well in most cases. Second is to keep these things in context. That is to say, most cops in New York, for example, where I live, are good cops. They do what they're supposed to do. They're well trained. They care about their mission, and they're devoted to public service. But in every group, including law professors, I suppose, there are bad apples. And so the second thing that's needed, in addition to transparency, is rooting out the bad apples. And that requires disciplinary proceedings that are transparent, in which non-police professionals participate, and in which the sanctions are sufficiently severe to deter bad practices on the part of police. So those are two things. A third thing is to try to find police, recruit police who are very committed to interacting on a personal basis on the street, on the sidewalks, in homes, with the people whom they are policing. That too is called community policing in the United States. It's been very successful, not entirely successful, but it's very successful. Get them out of their cars and onto the sidewalks where they can interact with the vast majority of people who want them to succeed and want their protection. In contrast to calls to defund the police, which many in the United States who are protesting Black Lives Matter are calling for. I think it's a great mistake. And I hope that Vice President Biden will resist those calls to defund the police. So far, he has.
Thank you very much, Peter. There's another question about the role of the government itself. And you have been a long-time votary of a limited government as well. Now, it has been observed that contact tracing and tracking apps developed to contain, let's say, the spread of COVID-19 have stoked fears over data privacy, including in India. Has the pandemic given too many powers to governments and corporations around the world? And what role you think can lawyers and law students play in this situation?
Also a very excellent and challenging question. It's a tension, as most important value clashes in the real world are. It's a tension among competing values. And also, we're ignorant of some of the key facts that we need to know. This is particularly true in the COVID situation, in which, although there's a lot of research out there and we're getting reports all the time, the facts on the ground seem to be changing frequently. I think the best that can be done is that we hold our leaders to account, that lawyers insist upon rule of law values, such as accountability, such as disclosure, such as fair process. But they should realize that there are some situations in which the conflict of values is going to require somewhat greater authority on the part of public health people than otherwise. I'm not much for the idea that, as many Americans have claimed, that requiring the wearing of masks when one is in proximity to other people is an infringement of liberty. It's not an infringement of liberty, it's an enhancement of liberty. And making those kinds of judgments is absolutely crucial. And I think lawyers, by exposing those conflicts and thinking clearly about them, can very much help.
Thank you, Peter. There's another question about the current situation. This is about the challenge that both democracies, India and US, face when it comes to election funding, and in your country called campaign financing. What do you think about the current US framework of campaign fundraising? Now, of course, this is a problem that predates Trump, and arguably the Democratic primaries have also seen their own self-funding billionaire, and elections have become a huge ability to raise resources. So the question is, to what extent this entire need for significant resources to run election campaigns is potentially affecting and undermining the ability to advance the democratic ideals of rule of law?
A very challenging question. I think there are some things that can be done, but there's no perfect solution in this area, because again, the conflicting values are very real, and we can't just define them away. So your observation is absolutely correct that the cost of elections in the United States is very high. That's partly because we're a media-run country, or media-saturated country, and it's partly because we're a very large country. And of course, those particular problems are even greater in India. We view the political parties as being independent entities that should operate apart from the government and not be under the influence of the government. And I think that's a very sound principle, even though it's perfectly obvious, almost by definition, that elections are the public's business and in the public interest. Still, we need to assure the autonomy of our political parties as much as we can. Secondly, there's the First Amendment, which in the United States has been interpreted very broadly, perhaps too broadly, to protect the right of people to express themselves by their support of particular candidates, including financial support. There's a sharp division in the country over whether that particular aspect of speech is properly defined and properly limited. That's an ongoing debate. A couple of other observations about that may be important in thinking about this problem. One is that small donors tend to be more extreme. And so solutions that tend to, that want to emphasize encouraging small donors are likely to lead to a much greater separation of the voters and of their parties. That's just the way it is. And we have to take that into account. I think the government could require TV stations and other media to provide equal access to candidates, free access. That's also tricky because it may give a platform to people who don't have much political support and people who are literally crazy, but who want their day in the sun before the American public. So that is something that would have to be regulated and carefully defined. But I think it could be done so that the campaigns are not quite as expensive as they are now. But basically, I don't think there's a lot that can be done, with the exception of those kinds of changes. I don't think there's a lot that can be done given our constraints. The United States has a lot of elections because we have primary elections. We have many more elections than most countries do, and that increases the cost of elections as well. Finally, I think that disclosure, as I've emphasized in other areas, is a very important constraint on the ability of money to influence elections. It turns out that the parties' financial contributions are relatively, I emphasize the relatively, in balance. So the prospect of having one party overwhelm the other party with dollars has not been realized in practice. Every action generates a reaction, and the more the Republicans raise for Trump, the more Democrats tending to raise for Biden. So that the problem is not quite as crippling as it might otherwise seem, but it is a major problem.
Thank you very much, Peter, for that very comprehensive response. Let me come to the last question, because there are too many questions which I won't be able to take it up. We are running out of time. This question is about how do we make law schools and legal education more socially relevant so that law students and law graduates don't end up having a far more myopic view about their future, in which the pursuit of acquiring and amassing wealth becomes the single most important objective for their future, but also to keep in mind that at the end of the day, law as a discipline, as a profession, has something to be contributed towards making a social impact, changing lives, and probably making the world a better place.
Well, I have a couple of reactions to that. One is that Jindal Global Law School is undoubtedly doing that and will continue to do that. And that was part of the conception of the law school that you began with so many years ago, and you have kept that ideal in plain view. And I presume that the curriculum and the professor's presentation of materials reflects that. And I also assume that students groups that have formed on the campus, or at least in the absence of COVID, will pursue that. But basically, that's a matter of character. That's a matter of students' individual character and the way in which they were raised and the kinds of values that move them. And much of that, of course, comes from their parents and from their communities. They will ultimately have to decide for themselves how they want to spend their precious years on earth as lawyers. But one very important thing that they should consider is that even if they go into the practice of private law, commercial law, they can do pro bono service at law firms. This is a very, very well-developed phenomenon among major firms in the United States. I don't know if that's true in India as well, but a lot of attention could be devoted by the law schools, perhaps led by Jindal, to persuade law firms to take on pro bono cases and assign their young lawyers to work on those on firm time. The other thing is that your students ought to understand that when they leave their offices, they have another life or several lives to live in their families and in their communities. And they can volunteer, and many lawyers are very much valued by community organizations to serve the public good as they define it. So there are lots of ways in which young lawyers can do this, and that the law schools can encourage this. But ultimately, it's going to depend on the values that young people bring to law school, augmented by the values that are praised and celebrated at JGLS.
Thank you very much, Peter, for the again a very comprehensive set of responses, for you to so patiently and poignantly responding to those questions. Before we end the program, now I call upon Ankita to take it forward with those two of our other colleagues saying a few words as we move into the concluding segment of this evening's commencement lecture.
Thank you so much, Professor Schuck and Professor Kumar, for engaging in this Q&A session and responding to the questions from the audience. I would now request Associate Professor and Associate Dean at Jindal Global Law School, He's the person leading the way to ensure that all of us, students and faculty alike, have a great experience working as a team. And I'm going to open the floor to him to introduce the academic committees of JGLS.
Thank you so much, Professor Ankita. A very good evening to the incoming LLB class of 2020. It's that time of the year when we find it really difficult to contain our excitement, for there is a young and exuberant group of students joining us on board Jindal Global University. My name is Manveen Singh. I'm an associate professor and I teach intellectual property law at Jindal Global Law School. But outside of my classes, I also play the role of an associate dean and director of the graduate program at the law school. I work with a team of 8 young and highly dedicated faculty members, and together we will be making sure that you have a seamless transition to learning at the law school. My office, that is the Office of Academic Affairs, looks after several portfolios, the chief amongst them being firstly attendance. At JGLS, students in the interest of uniformity are required to maintain a minimum attendance of 70% to be eligible to appear for the end term exams. So you must ensure regularity in attending your lectures. Second is mentorship. Our focus at JGLS is not just on the academic performance of the students, but also on their overall well-being. The mentorship program is designed with the objective of extending additional support to the students as and when they reach out. And lastly, examinations. To graduate, students of the 3-year LL.B program are required to fulfill a total of 120 credits, with majority of these credits to be earned through compulsory and elective courses. You are urged to keep up to date with your credit status after each semester. Very soon, you will be receiving a copy of the student handbook with a comprehensive account of all the student policies. In addition to the student handbook, you will also be provided with a copy of the academic action plan for the fall 2020 semester, which is formulated while keeping in mind the unique situation presented by the ongoing pandemic. I urge you to go through both these documents. Needless to say, my colleagues and I will always be available to offer our unconditional support and guidance with respect to all the student policies, including the ones just mentioned. So feel free to reach out. We are all just an email away. The ongoing global pandemic might have made things difficult for humanity at large. However, I would like to leave you with a renewed sense of optimism by quoting Steve Jobs. He said, and I quote, "My favorite things in life don't cost any money." It's really clear that the most precious resource we all have is time. So don't be afraid to go out and make the most of your time at this beautiful place called OP Jindal Global University. Once we are through this pandemic, I fervently look forward to welcoming all of you on campus. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Singh, for introducing the academic committees of JGLS and instilling in all of us a sense of optimism in these difficult times. I would now request Professor Dabiru Sridhar Patnaik, the Registrar at Jindal Global University, to make the concluding remarks.
Thank you so much, Nisha. Good evening, everyone. First of all, congratulations to the students of 3 years LL.B who joined the Jindal Global Law School. It's indeed a great recognition of your merit and the efforts that you had put in to become the incoming batch of this academic year, 3 years LL.B program at the JGLS. And what a great beginning it has been listening to Professor Peter Schuck. It's truly a masterclass combining varieties of disciplines and methods, be it comparative constitution or be it even the sociological aspects in relation to constitution and law, and even the political science related aspects. And it is these kind of techniques which are indeed important even to deal with the kind of topic that we had chosen to speak on this evening, law and liberal values in an illiberal era, in order to distinguish what could be the strong and the mild forms of liberal values, so that we do have a kind of a society that we all envisage in terms of democracy,
and related values. And this is what you can expect when you join Jindal Global Law School at the OP Jindal Global University, the kind of intellectual resources and the kind of curricular and even the co-curricular aspects. And as a global university, this will be our ongoing and continuous commitment to offer the best in terms of the courses and in terms of all the other multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary aspects related to courses coming from the law school and even all the other 8 schools of the university. So you will truly have an enriching and an engaging time, about which my colleagues had already touched about. But I would request you to make use of the next 3 years that you're going to spend here to carve a vision for yourself and to implement that particular vision and to realize a mission, something that's in consonance with the graduate attributes of the JGU, so that you develop independent thinking, critical thinking, and transferable skills that you are going to take into your respective careers or whatever you dream to become. And truly, all these things will become a possibility at JGU, because I would be immodest for a moment. JGU is the kind of place that can offer you the kind of a training that one desires, and then the kind of a training that one ideates, and even in an ideal situation. So make the best out of it and use this opportunity to sort of learn the best from the best minds. On this particular note, I would also appeal to each one of you to follow all the university regulations and take complete responsibility for yourself and even towards the community, and respect the spaces and even the diversity, and make use of the academic freedom that you have to your fullest benefit in a positive manner. And my congratulations to each one of you once again. And I also take this opportunity to thank Professor Peter Schuck for his ongoing support, guidance, and mentoring, and for also agreeing to be with us this evening to share his ideas on the topic that he had just spoken on. And I also take this opportunity to thank the leadership of the university, in particular the Vice Chancellor, for his energy and for his enthusiasm and for his vision and for his constant guidance and motivation, not only to drive the academic efforts of the university in its entirety, but also to steer the activities of the Jindal Global Law School. I also take this opportunity to thank all my other colleagues at the Jgls, Professor Sridhar, Professor Manveen, and it will be a long list, so I might fail to take some names, but since it's a collective effort, it may not be even possible to enlist all the names, but I'm sincerely grateful to each one of them for making this a possibility that we're all together this evening to listen to Peter Schuck and to welcome the incoming batch of LL.B, the class of 2023. I also take this opportunity to acknowledge the efforts of the admissions office at the law school, led by Professor Anand Prakash Mishra, and also the Office of Information Technology and Communications for all their support in making this a reality in a virtual world. Thank you so much. You have a great time, and I declare the program as closed now. Thank you so much.